Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Debunking the Myths of Risk-Based Monitoring for a New Approach to Quality Management. I'm Mike Christelle, Managing Editor for Applied Clinical Trials, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are delighted to bring you this educational web seminar presented by Applied Clinical Trials and sponsored by Remark Systems. Remark Systems is a provider of risk-based monitoring software solutions, headquartered in Raleigh with a development center in Indianapolis. Remark Systems has developed the first fully integrated workflow system to design, deploy, and manage RBM clinical trials. For more information about Remark's RBM solution, please visit the company's website at www.remarksystems.com or email info@remarksystems.com. Also, follow Remark on Twitter at their handles at Remark Systems, and you can join the LinkedIn group, RBM Industry Dynamics. We have a few important announcements before we begin. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. We will aim to respond to as many of your questions as possible. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small green icon in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or by hovering your mouse over the lower right-hand corner and dragging the window to the desired size. The slides will advance automatically during the event. Should you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark Help widget in the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. I would like to now introduce today's speaker. We are pleased to be joined by Dr. Michael Arlotto. Michael's the founder and CEO of Remark Systems, a software development company formed in 2015 and dedicated to improving clinical trial safety and efficiency. The company's first product is Remark QMS, a comprehensive purpose-built SaaS platform to design, deploy, and manage RBM clinical trials. Thank you for joining us today, Michael. You have the floor.
Thank you, Michael. Over the past couple of years, there's been much debate as what risk-based monitoring is actually. So I thought the best place to start is a definition of risk-based monitoring. Clinical monitoring, or traditional clinical monitoring, is the oversight and administrative efforts that monitor a participant's health and efficacy during a clinical trial. Traditional clinical monitoring involves a visit to an investigator site at a given frequency. For example, a monitoring visit will occur every 6 weeks. Risk-based monitoring is a modified resolution of the clinical monitoring schema. It's characterized by promoting a risk mitigation strategy. Let's talk a little bit first about what a risk mitigation strategy is. Risk-based monitoring has been used by other industries for years. It's based on a strategy employing the quality management principles. These quality management principles are centered on conducting a risk assessment, monitoring the risks, and mitigating the risks as issues arise, with the overall goal of early detection of issues and proactive risk management. So how does risk-based monitoring apply in a clinical setting? It's really a dynamic monitoring strategy, whereby the extent and focus of activities are modified based on pre-agreed parameters. Risk-based monitoring involves both remote or centralized monitoring, as well as on-site monitoring. For efficient and effective remote monitoring advancements, technology is an important component. Therefore, in a clinical setting, risk-based monitoring will have the greatest impact on enhanced patient safety and improved data quality. There are many misconceptions associated with risk-based monitoring in the clinical setting. The focus of this webinar is to debunk 5 of the common myths associated with risk-based monitoring. Namely, risk-based monitoring is a requirement of ICH E6R2 guidelines released in November of 2016. Risk-based monitoring is purely reducing source document verification. Technology alone is a solution to risk-based monitoring. Machine learning is costly and complex to implement. And finally, clinical investigators are out of the loop in risk-based monitoring paradigm. Before we start and look at each one of these myths, I'm going to pass it back to Mike for a quick polling survey. Mike?
Thanks, Michael. Yes, I'd like to now ask our audience to participate in a brief polling question. Please click and enter your answers directly on the screen. The poll question is, which ED system do you most frequently use? Is it Paraxel's Database Labs EDC, Medidata Rave, Bioclinica Express, Omnicom Trial Master, or other? Give our audience a few moments to choose there. Once again, the question is, which ED system do you use most frequently? Paraxel, Data Labs, Medidata Rave, Bioclinica Express, Omnicom Trial Master, or another system altogether. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for participating in our poll. I would like to now pass it back to Michael.
Thanks, Mike. So we're going to work through each one of the myths and one by one. So the first one is regarding risk-based monitoring as a new requirement of the ICH guidelines. There's been many discussions since the ICH E6 R2 guidelines were released in November of 2016. Since the ICH guidelines were first developed some 30 years ago, the scale, complexity, and cost of clinical trials have increased. Evolution in technology and risk management processes offer new opportunities to increase the efficiency and focus on relevant activities. When the original ICH E6 R1 text was prepared, clinical trials were performed in a largely paper-based process. Advances in the use of electronic data recording and reporting facilitating implementation of other approaches. Therefore, this guideline has been amended to encourage implementation of approved and more efficient approaches to clinical trial design, conduct, oversight, recording and reporting, while continuing to ensure human subject protection and reliability of trial results. As it pertains to risk-based monitoring, there are three areas in the regulation that have needed updating, namely quality management, oversight, and monitoring. The first section is Section 5.0 of the regulation. It's focused on quality management. The sponsor should implement a system to manage quality throughout all stages of the trial process. Quality management includes the design of efficient clinical trial protocols and tools, as well as procedures for data collection and processing, and the collection of information that's essential to making decisions. The methods used to assure and control the quality of a trial should be proportionate to the risks inherent in that trial and the importance of the information collected. The quality management system should use a risk-based approach, and it's described in great details in Section 5.0.1 through .7. Basically, a quality management approach to clinical trials management. The second is found in Section 5.2, and this really states that the sponsor should ensure oversight of any trial-related duties and function carried out on its behalf, including trial-related duties and functions that are subcontracted to another party by the sponsor's contracted CRO. So this is an enhancement of the oversight function of the sponsor. And third, in Section 5.18, the sponsor should develop a systematic, prioritized, risk-based approach to monitoring clinical trials. The flexibility in the extent and nature of the monitoring described in this section is intended to permit a varied approach that improves the effectiveness and efficiency of monitoring. The sponsor may choose on-site monitoring, a combination of on-site and centralized monitoring, or when justified, centralized monitoring alone. The sponsor needs to document the rationale for choosing each monitoring strategy and should be included in the clinical monitoring plan. On-site monitoring is performed at sites at which a clinical trial is being conducted, while centralized monitoring is a remote evaluation of accumulated data, performed in a timely manner, supported by appropriate qualified and trained persons. So this evolution over the past 20 years demonstrates that the ICH guidelines are more than just a risk-based monitoring. It is a systematic quality management system. It's ensuring the oversight by the sponsor, and it's a systemic risk-based approach to monitoring. So ICH E6R2 is more than just risk-based monitoring. It's a quality management approach to clinical monitoring and study oversight. As we discuss some of the regulatory components of risk-based monitoring, now let's look at some of the operational components of managing risk. A process is needed to identify the risk, and that's critical. Transcelerate has developed a risk assessment characterization tool, or RACT. It's a template that helps to identify, manage, and mitigate the risk components of the clinical trial. It's important to monitor the risks. I believe this involves the remote monitoring component that has a view into the data of a patient at a site and study level. How these risks will be mitigated is the next step. Based on the risks, what are the mitigations that need to occur? By using the RACT, you can have a pre-planned approach to managing issues that may arise to mitigate the risk. As mitigation occurs, you must be able to prove that the actions were taken. These actions can vary from contact to a site, to an on-site visit, to a protocol change, or whatever is necessary for patient safety and data quality. Overall, this entire process must be dynamic, so you can justify what and why you took the action in response to either a pre-planned or known risk, or an unknown risk that may arise during the course of a study. All of these elements need to be addressed when creating a monitoring plan. This leads us to the level of SDV. Source document verification is one of the small components of risk-based monitoring. It is not the panacea to reducing the rising costs of clinical development, but it's an important component. SDV really looks for transcription errors from the database to the source document. In a traditional monitoring paradigm, 100% of the data is SDV'd. But the question arises, is that really necessary? There was a study done in 2014 and published in the DIA journal that showed in all of the data that was entered at a site, only 3.7% of the data needed correction. And only a third of that data needed correction was identified by SDV. In addition, approximately 50% of a site visit was focused on source document verification. The risk-based monitoring approach uses a focused SDV plan that should look at about 100% of the data associated with safety and endpoints, and a smaller amount of SDV on the remaining collected data points, allowing more time on site to focus on the risks that have been identified, SDR, or informed consent, protocol compliance, training, and other issues that could help a site enroll patients. Although reduced SDV is an important component, the quality management approach is far more important. The ability to review data in a remote central manner, to detect trends and issues at an earlier time, and to take steps to address these trends and issues as they arise are more important components of risk-based monitoring. There's an important component of technology in risk-based monitoring. The need to aggregate the data from multiple sources, to present it to an end user in a meaningful manner is very important. Creating visualizations of the data to get the full view of the patient and the site over time. The ability to develop an analytical tool to identify and measure risk is an important element. But like any new procedure, risk-based monitoring requires people, process, and technology. People that are well-trained and have an understanding of the task at hand is probably the most important component. They need to have a true appreciation for quality management approach. A robust process that people can follow is also critical. And finally, the people and process need to be supported by a technology. Technology should enable the process and be relevant to the roles the people are required to perform. If we look at the characteristics of risk-based monitoring technology that really supports the people and processes, we should see an allowance for central surveillance of a study, a site, and a patient, support of quality management approach and thus a risk assessment, allow for monitoring of data across all functional areas like statistics, clinical, medical, data management, and safety, have the flexibility to adjust for changes at the site, have a strong remote monitoring capability, and allow monitoring to be customized and focused at the site, addressing those issues that have arisen during the remote monitoring process. Technology alone is not the solution. Overall, technology needs to support the people and processes associated with the quality management system. Machine learning, artificial intelligence. These are terms that are threatening to some and intriguing to others. It has the mystique associated with machines replacing humans. Clinical research involves the health and safety of humans and requires direct human intervention. That being said, the machine has the capacity to analyze a large amount of data and present the data to humans. The challenge is balancing that ability to have a simpler user interface that a trained individual can use to create actionable recommendations. We are exposed daily to this type of information. When we shop at Amazon, the machine recommends to us items that we may be interested in purchasing. This recommendation is based both on previous buying habits as well as what cluster of shoppers we resemble. So why is it not possible to create such a recommendation engine in clinical trials? Let's start with the costs associated with people and process, and then investigate the technology a little bit more. People will need to be trained on this new or modified roles. I think of the central monitor as the keystone of the risk-based monitoring, the air traffic controller of a clinical trial. They will determine how sites are performing, triage tasks from persons reviewing patient-level data, and trigger an on-site monitoring visit. The process and technology will need to support such a role. Initially, there will be a cost associated with training people and the development of the processes. Likewise, the implementation of the technology. The advent of software as a service can create a flexible approach without the need for large capital expenditures. As the risk-based monitoring process matures, the overall costs associated with the study conduct will be reduced, partly driven by fewer yet more productive on-site visits, by a continuous monitoring of data. The quality of the data will improve, and the time from last patient visit to database lock should be reduced. The impact on patient safety will be improved. As we improve our knowledge, we can also use the machine to further recommend actions as issues are presented. We currently use a simple user interface to create distance measurements. This allows us to develop algorithms to cluster similar patients and sites. The value here allows you not only to relate a given patient to the average or median of a value in the study, but also to compare that patient to a similar cluster. Machine learning can also identify data outliers in a dynamic manner and identify missing data with as little as 3 patients without a schedule of events. As we build our knowledge libraries, we can begin to train machines to understand the nuances of therapeutic areas, disease states, and drug targets. This, combined with the robust quality management risk assessment, will both drive down the costs and improve patient safety. So in short term, there's really nothing to be afraid of with machine learning. And although the costs initially may be higher until people in process and technology are trained, overall the costs will be reduced with time. There's been a lot of concern about the impact of investigative sites on risk-based monitoring. Initially, people thought that the reduced SDV would create more of a burden on the investigator sites. In May of 2017, ISR reported on risk-based monitoring. They focused on ways to improve the site experience. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. Let me go back a slide. In terms of SDV, investigators had initial concerns that the reduced on-site monitoring will result in an increased burden on site staff. The results have shown that proper training of site personnel, procedures to eliminate data handling, and simple-to-use technology, people, process, and technology again, can alleviate the site concerns. Less time on site can allow site staff to support the trial in other ways. They can focus on enrollment, patient compliance, etc. The continuous remote monitoring of all data will allow issues to be resolved in both a time and cost-efficient manner. But sponsors need to be respectful of site personnel by not over-communicating via email or phone. If you can package all of the issues to a site, to a scheduled call or a focused email between visits, that would be optimal for the investigator site. The ISR report found some trends across the investigative site. Using a risk-based approach improved both on-site activity and satisfaction. Site surveys continue to show improving feedback. Sites are satisfied with sponsor communications and on-site visits. Finally, improve quality by recognizing issues earlier and quicker. To keep investigators in the loop requires involvement in the quality management process. They are a critical component of every study, and communication is important. I hope this webinar has helped address. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. I hope this webinar has helped clarify some of the myths associated with risk-based monitoring. I wanted to end with the value of risk-based monitoring as a key component to the quality management and some of the trends that were presented in this discussion. Risk-based monitoring requires people, process, and technology, an integrated technology approach. Benefits of risk-based monitoring can be a reduction in the costs and effective resource utilization, improvement in data quality, and enhanced patient safety. Even with less on-site monitoring, there will be an increase in data monitoring remotely. Thank you for your time, and we have time for a couple of questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to moderate the questions. Thank you. Mike?
Oh, sorry about that. I have to turn off the mute button there. Thank you, Michael, for such an informative presentation. We do appreciate it. Yes, it's time for the Q&A portion. I would like to remind our audience how to submit questions. You could submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of the presentation window. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. Okay, let's see. Our first question coming in. We have a proprietary risk instrument that we need to use for every study and have had trouble finding a system that integrates with it. I like the flexibility this template provides, but would it be easier to go with a generic RACT template that's more commonly supported?
Yeah, it's a good question, Mike. The system that we've developed allows for templates from various sources to be pulled in. So we start with the RACT, but if you have your own template you'd like to use, whether it's based on risk assessment log that's common in Project Management Institute training, or whether it's your own proprietary log, we can incorporate that directly into our system. The beauty of this is you can take the technology, you can take that risk assessment, link it to individual data points, and then be able to see that data as an end user in a longitudinal manner, looking at patient, site, or study level data. Next question.
Okay. All right, thanks for that answer. Yeah, and another question coming in here. Let's see. We haven't worked with machine learning algorithms in the past, and I don't want to tie up our IT resources managing this type of solution. But I also don't want to leave it all up to the algorithm. How difficult is it to train this sort of system if you don't have a development background?
Yeah, I think a lot of the technology that's out there right now requires a lot of efforts from data scientists and statisticians to build these data algorithms. What we've done in our system is made a simple user interface. So with minimal training, you can create distance algorithms that then can be used in clustering. You can use our system to pick up issues with outliers. You can use the system to create missing visits, and also to start to look at trends in the monitoring of the site. Our system will tell you, based on the number of items that occur or actions that are seen in the site, whether you should increase or decrease the monitoring levels, or whether you should increase or decrease the SDV levels. All of this should be easy and simple to use. Of course, there's more complex algorithms that can be built, but we're partnered with many of our customers to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another question from the audience. A slide during the presentation showed generically stated cost savings. Can you provide examples of the types of trials, size of the study, these savings were observed in, and approximately percent of the cost reduction?
Sure. Transcelerate estimates that you should be able to save 20 to 25% of your monitoring visits using a risk-based approach. We found that in clinical trials using our system, we've seen a reduction in the number of on-site visits. So if you think about the site visits as being a major cost driver in the cost of clinical research, you can reduce as much as 10 to 15% of clinical monitoring costs. Normally, we think of clinical monitoring costs being about 60% of clinical trial costs. So that's a substantial reduction. We've seen this in some large phase 3 clinical trials of 300 to 500 patients. And we've also seen it in some smaller trials where, with a limited number of sites, you can actually go in and reduce your monitoring visits. So, monitoring visit is one component. By using a risk-based monitoring approach and keeping track of the data in real time and addressing those issues as they come up, you improve data quality. And on average, if it takes 8 to 10 weeks from last patient visit to database lock, we've seen a reduction to 4 or 5 with some of our customers by using our system. So they're just two examples of how you can both save time and reduce costs through monitoring visits.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thanks for that answer. It looks like another question is in. For smaller companies specifically, and in smaller trials, how do you get enough data in order to run these systems? That is, when the quote N is small. How well does this work?
Yeah, so I assume this is asking about the machine learning. The machine learning components can work with as little as an N of 3. If you think, for example, patient 1 came in and did visit 1, and labs and vitals were collected. Patient 2 came in, and maybe we only got labs, but no vitals. So when the third patient comes in and we see vitals and labs for that visit, we know that something's different with patient number 2. So with very small amounts of data, we can start to use the machine learning algorithms to see if something's gone awry. So it works really well. It works well in small studies. Of course, it works better when there's a larger N, but it's still useful with smaller studies.
Yeah, okay. What metrics have you used to show that your RBM strategies have been successful?
Yeah, I think the metrics we use is we're able to resolve queries quicker at a site. We're able to identify those sites that are having issues and are able to intervene with those sites quicker. So you'll be able to see some of that as reduced audit findings. I think some of the other things we're able to do is look at trends. For example, in one of our studies, the drug may have an impact on congestive heart failure in a negative way. So in the protocol, it states that if a patient gains more than 5 pounds since the beginning of the trial, or more than 3 pounds since the previous visit, you should stop the drug. sounds like that's really easy to look at and monitor, but in actuality, it's kind of hard. When the patient comes into the site, the patient's weighed, and the data is entered into the EDC system. You have to go back and look at the previous visit, or maybe go back 3 or 4 visits to look at the baseline to see how much weight gain's been changed. With our system, as the data is ingested into the system, we can create flexible metrics to look at those body changes and to create a flag as soon as we see that. So if we know that it's greater than 5 pounds should stop the drug, maybe we create a flag when the patient gains 4 pounds and alert the site that something may be happening with that patient. So those are the kind of successful metrics that we've seen to date.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, another question from the audience. This person says, we're having trouble identifying our KRIs and how much importance to put on each one of those. Do you have any best practices related to this?
Yeah, I think you have to have some KRIs that are actually manageable and have impact. For example, I think KRIs that look at site quality is important. I think such as number of outstanding queries or number of protocol deviations. I think some study ones are important. You know, how many issues are you actually seeing? Are there a lot of protocol deviations overall in the study? And then I think you should have some KRIs that look and focus on patient safety. It's really derived by the protocol. So I think with some of our customers, we see a core of about 6 KRIs around site and study metrics, and then other KRIs that are customized, I guess you could say, or specific towards that particular study.
Okay. Okay, the next question. If only 0.3% of data needs to be queried to reduce trial risk to a patient, then why is it that monitors produce hundreds, if not thousands, of these queries?
Yeah, so I think what's actually produced in the queries are checks when the database is actually being programmed. So if a piece of data is entered wrong into a system, a query is generated. I think when we go out and look at data in a system or an on-site visit, and we're looking for those transcription errors, does the source document match the database? I think that's a little different. So what I was talking about when I talked about SDV errors was those transcription errors. I think query data is a little bit different. That actually is looking at the quality of the data entered into the database and not looking at the discrepancies between the source and the database.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, another question from an audience member. Traditionally, on-site monitoring has a high turnover. How do you think RBM has changed this, if at all, this trend?
Yeah, so I assume what you mean by turnover is turnover of the staff involved in monitoring. Monitoring is a grueling task. You're out on the road all the time. I think with the remote monitoring, you're allowed to still get that close contact to the study, still get that close feel for the data that's coming through, and then you go out and visit the site when there's enough actions or issues to warrant that. So I think in risk-based monitoring solution we've seen with some of our customers, turnover has actually decreased using this approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, looks like another question's come in. How do you deal with sites who refuse to participate to remote monitoring or centralized monitoring? In the past, they have dealt with monitors who had 3-hour phone calls, keeping the study staff busy and unavailable for patient care. So how do you sort of deal with sites who would rather not participate in remote monitoring or centralized monitoring?
Yeah, so with centralized monitoring, we're looking at the data as it comes in through the systems, right? There's that interaction with the site occurs after we reviewed the data. I think, the amount of those 3-hour calls with the site, those are the things that we need to be more cautious of and protect the sites. We need to go back to them with, a list of issues that we've seen in centralized monitoring and give them time to respond to it. I think we have to, instead of every time we see an issue, we call or ping the site, I think we need to kind of consolidate and package those up and send them back to the site in, with some sort of frequency. I think that will improve site participation and site satisfaction with the RBM process.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, next question for you, Michael. Is it more effective to have different CRAs monitoring different levels of risk, such as at patient, site, and study levels, or one user overseeing everything? This individual has a small team, but they're worried that there's too much for one person to focus on.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, people use our system in many different ways. Sometimes the patient-level monitoring is done by a physician, and then the central monitoring is done by a lead CRA or a lead clinical monitor, and then those actions that are found are packaged up and sent out to the CRAs in the field. Another approach that we've seen, and this is usually done with bigger teams. With smaller teams is we just basically divide up the patients or divide up the sites by each team member. And in our system, we have kind of a checklist. And using these checklists, you can look at patient-level data, site-level data, and study-level data. So with a relatively small team, you can review and monitor all of that data. So it works both ways. I think this is where technology really supports the people in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Well, thanks, Michael. Yeah, it looks like, unfortunately, we are out of time, but we do want to thank the audience for their interesting questions and for participating in today's event. We would also like to thank our sponsor, Remark Systems, for making today's educational webcast possible. And, of course, thank our speaker, Michael Lotto. Today's webcast will be available for on-demand viewing through June of next year. You will receive an email from ACT alerting you to when this webcast will be available for replay. We invite you to forward that announcement to your colleagues who may have missed today's live event. See you next time, everybody. Goodbye.